Hi, I'm Zahar, and welcome back to the Weekly Point with Z. Now, if you haven't had a chance to check out some of the episodes in the last few weeks, I would just like to recap on the fact that this episode is the final episode in a series on the Socioeconomics of Lebanon. And I would like to invite you to kind of check out the previous content in the previous few weeks as part of the series in order to gain a better understanding of what we've discussed in the past and how that led us to the conversation that we're going to have today. Now, I'm not going to do what I usually do by recapping on some of the previous information. There's a lot of important content to cover today. So what I would tend to do is jump right into the topic and just avoid that short summary for the sake of time. Now, last week I promised to provide a few solutions to the crisis of Lebanon, or at least discuss a few solutions. Now, there's no easy way to say this, but none of those solutions is going to be pleasant, and none of them is going to be easy to implement. And I guess you've already figured that out from the magnitude of the crisis that the country's currently going through. But the uneasy part is that there's no way to resolve the current crisis by keeping the current system. The modern state of Lebanon has foundational issues, which we've discussed at length in the previous weeks, which need to be resolved. You need to overhaul the entire system. The way the country's set up is not allowing it to progress forward. All it does is create crisis upon crisis every few years or so, and drags the country down a rabbit hole that it cannot jump out of. There is no way with the current setup to provide solutions to the problems that the country is plagued with, that the country has been plagued with. But anyway, to jump right into it, in order to resolve the crisis in Lebanon, you need to borrow more money. There's no way around it. There's no other solution, and any other practical solution that would allow you to resolve it as is. The country's bankrupt, the banks have no liquidity, the people have lost their savings, the financial system has collapsed, the economic system has collapsed. There is no way of generating money internally. There's no capital within the country that would allow you to progress forward. Now, having said that, creditors are not willing to lend Lebanon any money for obvious reasons. And in order to borrow more money, we need to inspire confidence in those creditors. And most of them are going to be international creditors because the local banks can no longer lend money to the government. They don't have that capacity, let alone return the savings of the local population. So international creditors are obviously much more stringent in the process of assessing the credibility of the person that or the entity that they're lending to, and there's very high requirements upon which they would lend us money, and obviously given the risk that is associated with that process, we would have to borrow money, or the Lebanese would have to borrow money at a very high interest rate, which is disadvantageous. So it would require some sort of intervention from either the World Bank, or other organizations that are associated with nations and are motivated by national interests or by the will of friendly nations to help the country out of this crisis. So it's not going to be your typical foreign investors buying government bonds and trying to lend the government money. That would not be a feasible solution. It would be more around certain nations coming together and deciding to lend the country money under facilitated terms, facilitated payment terms or repayment terms, but at the same time imposing very strict restrictions to make sure that that money doesn't go to the wrong places, like it usually does. Now, in order to inspire confidence in those creditors, you need to guarantee that the money is going to go to good use and that it will be effectively invested in economically viable projects, that there would be proper governance, and that you would at least aspire to eliminate or reduce corruption and make sure that you reform the economy, and at the same time contribute your own fair share by imposing austerity measures where you reduce spending and reform the economy in a way where you increase collection of taxes, or at least more effective collection of taxes and other forms of revenue to kind of put in your fair share in that investment. And at the same time, commit to a preset timeline to do all of this. So you need to provide a roadmap to how you're going to achieve all of this, what the milestones would be, and what the kind of success criteria would be. How are you going to measure that you've effectively met all of these requirements? And all of this has to be agreed with the international creditors, and based on that, they would lend you the money. Now, you have to do all of that while showing a united front, whereby the Lebanese people come together and express their commitment to this plan or this set of solutions. And you would have to commit to stop waging wars on your neighbor to the south, mainly Israel, because that would be a condition for international organizations which are usually dominated by the West and which are friendlier to the causes of Israel than they are to the causes of Lebanon. So that would also be a requirement or a condition to helping Lebanon out. Now, if we agree that all of this needs to happen, there's a set of solutions that you could put in place to make sure that at least you could get to a point where this would become feasible. And those solutions are multifaceted, and they cover different aspects of politics, society, and economics in Lebanon. And it requires an effort on multiple fronts. Again, this is the only way. You need to overhaul the entire system. There's no other way around it. Now, to start off, I would say a good starting point is for the Lebanese to come together, recognize each other's grievances, baseline the current crisis, baseline who's impacted and how, based on scientific, measurable, statistical data that demonstrates with clarity what is going on in the country and who's impacted and how. So they need to come together and look at the data and try to understand who's getting what, in what is being distributed, and what's left, and what's gone, and how is it gone. So they need to kind of agree on the magnitude of this crisis or magnitude of this problem. Then they need to come together and agree on a set of strategic goals that would leave everyone net better off. So everyone needs to agree that this is for the benefit of everyone. We need to do this together in order for everyone to benefit. It's not about my faction or your faction or his faction. Now, you might have grievances within your own communities, but now we need to focus on the bigger picture. So how do we improve things for everyone in general? And then we could talk about the nitty-gritties of the different grievances of the different communities and how things get distributed within. Then, as a next step, they need to come together and decide to eliminate the current factional system and reinstate a system that is A, decentralized, B, secular, C, that focuses on equitable growth and development, that has proper governance, that introduces accountability, and that focuses on merit. It's not about what sect or religion or group you belong to. It's about merit. I have a crisis. I have a problem. I'm in a swamp. I'm in the mud. I'm on quicksand. I need the most qualified person to pull me out of that quicksand. I don't want a religious cleric or some religious figure trying to pull me out and sinking along with me. I need someone who's qualified to pull me out. I need the most effective leader with the most effective set of skills and competencies to pull me out of this mess. I don't care what your religious affiliation is, as long as you could help resolve my problems and the problems of my children and guarantee a better, brighter future for everyone, then I don't care where you come from or what group you belong to. And they need to agree on that. They need to set up a system that allows for proper merit-based progression for everyone, removing all barriers to entry and allowing everyone to ascend based on how good they are, the set of skills that they have, and the solutions that they could provide. And they should be enabled to provide those solutions. So we should give them power and empower them to provide those solutions. Now, this is easier said than done, but the alternative is... So I wouldn't sell this idea, because as soon as you mention the word secularism, it brings in a lot of negative feelings among the Lebanese. And obviously the Lebanese are usually religiously charged. They're very religiously conservative or charged, or they're strong believers, so to speak. And it kind of triggers a lot of people. So the selling point is, first of all, it's not the form of secularism that you would find in France, for example, or the form of secularism that you would typically find in Turkey that is anti-religion. It's a form of secularism that the Lebanese should target that kind of aligns to the values that you find in the US or Canada, where everyone is allowed to practice their own religion however way they please, as long as they don't break any laws. It's that type of secularism that provides everyone the freedom of worship and religion and provides space for everyone to worship the way they want. Now, this is one part of it. And the other part is the selling point is finding a common shared ground to have a conversation around the problems that everyone is suffering with or suffering from, and providing solutions to them. So it's removing that source of tension or diffusing that source of friction between the different communities. If we're all disagreeing on religion, then let's remove religion out of the equation. If we're all resorting to our default mode of thinking about what others are getting as opposed to what I'm getting, rather than worrying about what everyone is getting. So I'm rather worried about what others are getting more than I'm actually worried about what I'm getting. And that's the situation in Lebanon. I don't care if I'm not getting enough, as long as others are getting even less or not getting anything at all. And this is the problem. This is why we need to remove that source of friction, because it's at the source of all of this nonsensical tension and infighting between people. Then they would need to agree that no topic is off the table. If you remove religion out of it, if you remove religious influence out of it, then no topic is off the table. They need to have a conversation that would cover every topic under the sun and that would resolve societal issues. It's not about operating within the confines of religious doctrine. I'm not bound by any religious doctrine, because obviously you got different religious views, and if everyone wants to impose their religious views, then you're not going to progress forward. So we need to agree that in order to provide solutions to these problems, you would have to remove the barriers on any topics, any taboos, any direction that any religious doctrine would take you into. There are so many discussions that need to happen that are not happening in Lebanon. Now, the next step would be to have a commitment by all parties to fight corruption wherever it stands. And again, this is easier said than done. Human beings are corruptible, especially when you've lived in an ecosystem that is so corrupt for so many years, and this is the only thing you know how to deal with. Then, and especially when you have an economic crisis and everyone is fighting over the same resources, then obviously the first thing you're going to resort to is corruption. Now, I'm not justifying it. I'm not a person who would resort to corruption, but or at least I'd like to think so, because I'm not in that situation. But what I'm saying is moral values are loose, are corruptible in a time of crises. So learning from the experience of others beyond and within the Middle East region, I would say the use of technology would provide a very strategic lever in this case. And if I could draw parallels or think of an example from other countries, I would think of countries like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, like Qatar, and other countries in the Gulf region, which introduce technology as a key strategic lever to curb down on corruption. They have centralized depositories of information that are only accessible by a very few number of people, in a very trusted, a very trusted number of people, and everything is controlled by protocols, by technology systems, by machines. So if you want to process anything, it's standardized within an electronic process that is being monitored at a central level, which would flag anything that goes wrong and disallow you to process things in a certain way or move beyond the procedures that are associated with every process and would not allow you to be would not allow you the flexibility to corrupt the process itself. So the use of technology would provide an excellent opportunity in this case. Then there needs to be a methodical way of assessing economic investments, development, and projects, whereby every project has to be economically viable and has to have a solid return on investment that is measurable and associated with success measures. And we need to guarantee that resources go to the most viable and most profitable and most strategic economic projects. Now, again, there's a people element to it, so it's not always the case. Realistically speaking, you can't always invest in the most optimally effective projects, because you need to keep in mind that there are different regions and there are different people that you need to cater for. There are the needs of the local populations of the different regions needs to be catered for, and it's not always the most economically viable solution, or at least economically viable option. But where possible, there needs to be a targeting of the most most economically viable projects. We need to make sure that we're getting the best for our money or our buck, or so to speak. And then, because the Lebanese have proven time and time again that they don't have the ability or don't have the will or don't have the experience to institute proper governance, accountability, and make sound economic decisions, then a key strategic lever would be to prioritize public-private relationships or public-private partnerships. And these partnerships need to happen with foreign entities and not local ones, because local ones are very prone to corruption and are often associated with the ruling class of politicians or corrupt politicians that currently rule the country. So these partnerships need to be established with foreign entities, foreign organizations, and they need to institute oversight by our foreign creditors. So basically, if I want to rebuild my infrastructure in order to allow for proper investment and lure in investments from parties who are willing to invest in Lebanon for whatever strategic advantage the country has. It could be labor, for example, educated labor at a cheap price, so to speak. Well, educated labor that is that is receiving compensation that is strategically advantageous for some companies, where there's a potential to outsource some services to Lebanon at an economically viable as an economically viable option. Then I need to kind of prop up the infrastructure to allow for those investments to happen. And in order to prop up those investments, I need to rely on partnerships with private entities, preferably, as I mentioned, foreign, because those entities are motivated by profit. So even though I don't have the capacity to assess the viability of an investment, or I don't have the experience or the ability or the will, I'm sure that these organizations do have the capacity and the will to do so because they want to maximize every bit of profit they could get out of this investment. Now, it's going to be a tricky one to lure in or at least establish these partnerships, because you need to make it profitable for them to invest or at least engage with you in this partnership. You need to provide them with certain guarantees. And this is where foreign creditors come in, because instead of financing the government, which is obviously corrupt and prone to wasting all of these investments in the wrong places, you would have the foreign creditor being part of that conversation with the private entity or private organization that will be investing, and they would finance it. So we would remove this role of intermediary from the government and allow the two to speak together, and the government would be the regulator. So the government would only regulate would regulate the ecosystem that these parties are going to operate in. So you got private entities or organizations that are motivated by profit. So you know that you're getting the most viably effective or optimized solution. And then you got your foreign oversight from creditors, international creditors, who are motivated by, who are worried about their investments and want to make sure that there's proper governance and accountability in place to guarantee that their money is not lost or that it doesn't go to any of the wrong pockets. And these two entities are obviously foreign, so they do have, and they're obviously international, and they all have the experience to make such deals happen. They do have the experience of engaging with one another to kind of facilitate this sort of deals. And then you got the government, which comes in as the regulator, where it gets a very good opportunity to reform the economic sector, which hits one of the other main goals that it needs to hit. But at the same time gives it a little bit of control over what's being agreed, so to speak, so that nothing gets agreed on its behalf without it being involved. And then once these partnerships are in place, you could start rebuilding your infrastructure, you could start improving utilities, services, and so on and so forth. You could probably start to facilitate the establishment of special economic zones, or at least giving incentives to foreign entities to invest, or local ones, because, well, the purpose as well is to prop up the local economy. So you could start in time facilitating the establishment of special economic zones based on the different economic advantages of every region or different regions. And then you could start, once you've gotten to a place where things are operating smoothly, you got proper controls in place, you're reforming economic sectors, you're on the right path forward, you could start bit by bit imposing your own conditions, because you would become a trustworthy partner in that relationship, and that would allow you to impose some of your own conditions, like, for example, requiring partnerships with local entities as well, private entities, to prop up the local economy, imposing conditions like transfer of knowledge, imposing conditions around local labor and the use of local labor and the transfer or localization of that international expertise and knowledge, and so on and so forth. And then the last topic that I would like to conclude this episode with, and I know that this is very controversial and it's going to trigger a lot of people as well. Lebanon needs to guarantee its neutrality, including by discussing a possible peace with Israel, or at least a more stable status quo. Because although I'm obviously not a fan of Israel, I'm not a fan at all of Israel, I don't see any possible outcome or event or future or result where Lebanon comes on top, where this conflict is beneficial for Lebanon or the Arabs or the Palestinian cause, Lebanon does not have any capacity to fight Israel. It's a nuisance, but nothing beyond that. Sure, you could hit Israel with rockets all day, but again, you're not going to change anything on the ground. There's no way of taking back that territory from Lebanon. Like, Lebanon is not able to do so. If you have a simple comparison between the two countries, between Israel and Lebanon, and you look at all the progress that Israel has made, and again, I'm not a fan of Israel, but I'm a realistic party. I'm a free thinker, so I'm trying to give you the full picture as it is on the ground. Realistically speaking, all of the accomplishments that Israel has made and all of the failures that Lebanon has gotten itself into, it's obvious you will lose. In every outcome, you will lose. There's an opportunity for us to engage with the international community and international parties who are willing to help stabilize that situation. Now, I'm not saying we compromise on any of our national rights. God forbid. As a Lebanese, you should not compromise on any of your national rights. If that's the case, if that would require a compromise, then I would say forget the peace. Keep doing what you're doing. But if there's no compromise, if you're guaranteed your territorial integrity and you're guaranteed status quo that would guarantee peace and prosperity on the southern front or southern border, then I would say Lebanon needs to go through that. Now, it could have been different 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, but it's not the case anymore. Lebanon has totally collapsed. It's a failed state. It can't fight that fight anymore. It can't have the burden of fighting on behalf of Arabs who are, in turn, making peace with Israel. It doesn't make sense. You're fighting on behalf of someone who's making peace with your rival, with whom you're fighting on their behalf. So it's nonsensical. So the topic of neutrality should be discussed, should be on the table. And again, there's no taboos, there's no topics off the table. And it should be the option of having peace or stabilizing the situation with Israel should definitely be discussed. Now, again, if it would require compromises on national interests or in territorial sovereignty, then the hell with it. You shouldn't go for it. But at least you should discuss it and assess what you can get out of it. There's an opportunity, there's a desire by the international community to facilitate that peace. And I think Lebanon should jump on that opportunity as long as it guarantees its rights. Now, I'd like to conclude this episode. I'd like to thank you for listening patiently, especially that, again, I was a little bit passionate on some of these topics. Thank you for bearing with me. I look forward to seeing you next week.